June 30th, 1986. Mexico City's Azteca Stadium. Roberto Vecchi sat in the Italian team's technical area when he saw Diego Maradona do something that made Salvatore Bagni break down crying in the 73rd minute. Not from pain, not from defeat, from something much deeper. 30 years later, Roberto had buried what he witnessed. The gesture, the words Maradona whispered. The reason Bagni never spoke about that match again. Then the package arrived at Roberto's door in Naples. No return address. Just a VHS tape with his name written in Maradona's handwriting. The footage showed everything. What the cameras missed. What the commentators never understood. What 3 men swore to take to their graves. Now one was dead, another was missing. And Roberto realized someone had been watching him for 3 decades, waiting for the right moment to make him choose between the truth and his family's safety. The moment when Maradona's act of kindness became the most dangerous secret in football. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The VHS tape sat on Roberto's kitchen table like a loaded gun. 3 days had passed since its arrival, and he hadn't touched it since that first viewing. The one that had sent him stumbling to the bathroom to vomit up 30 years of carefully constructed lies. Outside his cramped apartment, the Naples morning carried the usual symphony, motorbikes roaring through narrow streets, vendors shouting prices for bruised fruit, children's laughter echoing off crumbling walls. Roberto pressed his face against the window, scanning the street below. The same blue Fiat had been parked there for 2 days, different license plate than yesterday, but the same scratch along the passenger door. Someone was watching. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. The 5th this week. Pronto. Silence. Then a click. Roberto's hands trembled as he set the phone down. At 58, he looked older. The kind of weathering that comes not from sun or wind, but from carrying weight that was never meant to be yours. His reflection in the black television screen showed a man who had spent 3 decades coaching teenagers to chase dreams while his own rotted inside him. The morning training session at Campo Paradiso, ironic name for the patch of dirt where local kids came to escape their circumstances, felt like moving underwater. Roberto went through the motions, organizing drills, shouting encouragement, adjusting formations, but his mind kept drifting to that hotel room in Mexico City, 1986. The envelope of cash. The man in the expensive suit who knew things about Roberto's family that he shouldn't have known. "Coach, you okay?" Gennaro, his 16-year-old captain, jogged over during a water break. The boy had Maradona's left foot and his mother's worry lines, too young for either. "Fine, ragazzo. Just thinking about formations." "You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." Roberto almost laughed. If only it were that simple. During lunch break, he drove home through streets that felt different now. Every face potentially watching, every coincidence potentially planned. The package had changed everything, turned his quiet exile into a minefield. For 30 years, he'd convinced himself that silence was protection, that keeping the secret meant keeping everyone safe. The tape proved otherwise. Back in his apartment, Roberto stared at the VHS again. Beside it lay a newspaper clipping from November 25, 2020, Maradona's obituary. He'd read it dozens of times, searching between the lines for any hint that Diego had finally spoken. But there was nothing, just the usual tributes to genius, the familiar stories of triumph and tragedy. What they didn't know was that Maradona had died carrying the same burden Roberto had been carrying, the same impossible choice between truth and survival. His phone rang. This time, a number he recognized, his sister Maria in Rome. "Roberto, have you seen the news?" "What news?" "About Salvatore Bagni. They found him this morning, in his apartment in Florence. Heart attack, they're saying, but..." She paused. "Roberto, he left something for you. The police called, an envelope with your name on it." The room tilted. Roberto gripped the kitchen counter, knuckles white against the scarred wood. "What kind of envelope?" "I don't know. They want you to come identify yourself as the intended recipient." "Roberto, what's this about? You haven't spoken to Bagni in years. Years. Try decades. Not since that night in Mexico when they'd all sworn to forget what they'd witnessed." when three young men had chosen money and safety over justice. Now Maradona was dead, Bagni was dead, and Roberto was alone with a secret that someone clearly wanted exposed. After hanging up, he walked to his bedroom closet and pulled out an old shoebox hidden behind winter coats. Inside, beneath faded photographs and match programs, lay a single key. He'd kept it all these years without really knowing why. The key to a safety deposit box in Naples that contained the only other evidence of what had happened that day in Mexico. Evidence that someone else apparently had copies of. The blue Fiat was gone when he looked out the window again, replaced by a red Vespa with a rider who seemed very interested in his phone. Roberto closed the curtains and made a decision that terrified him. He was going to Florence to see what Bagni had left him. But first, he needed to visit that safety deposit box, to see if the insurance policy he'd kept for 3 decades was still there, or if someone had been playing a much longer game than he'd realized. The VHS tape seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as he prepared to leave. Whatever was on that footage, whatever moment of truth someone wanted him to see again, it was connected to everything falling apart now. In 1986, 3 men had witnessed something beautiful become something terrible. They'd been paid to forget, threatened to stay silent, and convinced that their cooperation would protect everyone involved. One was dead, one had just died. And Roberto was beginning to understand that his 30 years of silence hadn't protected anyone. It had just delayed the reckoning. The Banco di Napoli on Via dei Tribunali hadn't changed much in 30 years. The same marble floors, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. The same ornate ceiling that made Roberto feel small every time he entered. He clutched the key so tightly it left marks on his palm, a physical anchor in a world that suddenly felt unmoored. Box 847, he told the clerk, a woman with kind eyes who reminded him painfully of his daughter Lucia. The resemblance was so strong he had to look away, focusing instead on the faded security camera in the corner. How many times had someone watched him make this exact journey over the years? How long had they known about this place? The basement vault smelled of old paper and metal polish. Roberto's hands shook as he inserted the key, half expecting the box to be empty, ransacked by whoever was orchestrating this elaborate resurrection of the past. But when the metal door swung open, everything was exactly as he'd left it, a manila envelope, thick with photographs and documents, and beside it, something he'd almost forgotten, a child's drawing. Lucia had made it for him when she was 7, after he'd returned from Mexico. A crayon drawing of a soccer field with stick figures running across green grass under a smiling yellow sun. Papa's work, she'd written in careful block letters. He'd kept it here not as evidence, but as a reminder of what innocence looked like before the world taught you that sometimes staying quiet was the only way to protect the people you loved. Now Lucia was 37, married, living in Milan with 2 children of her own. She called him every Sunday, worried about his isolation, begging him to visit. "You're wasting away in that apartment, Papa. The grandchildren barely know you." Her voice always carried the weight of questions she was too kind to ask. "Why did you give up football? Why do you live like a monk? Why won't you let us help you?" Roberto traced his finger along the drawing's faded edges. What would she say if she knew the truth? That her father had been bought and paid for at 24? That he'd watched corruption destroy a man's career and stayed silent because they'd threatened to destroy more than just his own future? That every comfort she'd enjoyed growing up, the nice school, the family vacations, the security, had been built on blood money? The photographs in the envelope were exactly as he remembered. Grainy images from that hotel room meeting, receipts for cash transactions, a copy of the medical report about Bagni's accidental injury that had ended his World Cup dreams. But there was something new, a note in handwriting he didn't recognize, paper that looked far more recent than the other contents. The truth has a way of surfacing, Roberto. Some secrets are too big to stay buried forever. A friend, his chest tightened. Someone had been here. Someone had access to his most carefully guarded hiding place and had chosen not to take anything, just to leave a message. The violation felt complete and terrifying. Walking home through the labyrinthine streets of old Naples, Roberto found himself thinking about the boys at Campo Paradiso. Gennaro with his impossible dreams of Serie A stardom. Little Marco, whose father worked 3 jobs just to afford decent boots. They looked at Roberto with such trust, believing that football was still pure, that talent and hard work were enough. Every day he coached them, he committed a small act of hypocrisy, teaching them to believe in something he'd learned was fundamentally corrupted. But what was the alternative? To destroy their illusions? To tell them that sometimes the beautiful game was just another business transaction? His apartment felt smaller when he returned, the walls pressing closer. The VHS tape sat exactly where he'd left it, but now it seemed less like evidence and more like a countdown timer. The red Vespa was gone from the street below, replaced by an old woman feeding stray cats. Normal life continuing while his world unraveled frame by frame. Roberto made coffee with hands that barely cooperated, spilling grounds across the counter. The routine was supposed to be calming, but every familiar gesture felt like it might be among his last peaceful moments. Through the thin walls, he could hear his neighbor Mrs. Benedetti arguing with her son about money, their voices carrying the particular exhaustion of people who'd had the same fight too many times. This was his world now, small, contained, carefully constructed to avoid causing damage. No close relationships that could be threatened, no ambitions that could be used as leverage, no legacy except a handful of neighborhood kids who might remember a sad old coach who actually seemed to care. But even that modest existence was built on borrowed time, wasn't it? The truth was coming whether he helped it along or not. The question was whether he'd meet it as a coward or finally find the courage that had abandoned him in that Mexico City hotel room 30 years ago. Roberto picked up his phone to call for train tickets to Florence, knowing that each decision now carried the weight of decades of delayed consequences. The train booking website crashed 3 times before Roberto finally managed to secure a seat on the morning express to Florence. His credit card was declined twice, strange since he'd barely used it this month, forcing him to pay cash at the station like a man trying to stay invisible. The paranoia felt justified now. Someone was pulling strings, testing his movements, making sure he understood how exposed he really was. He was packing an overnight bag when his phone rang, not the anonymous silence he'd grown to expect, but a voice that made his blood freeze. "Hello, Roberto. It's been a long time." The accent was unmistakable, Argentinian but softened by decades of international living. Roberto's legs gave out, and he collapsed onto his bed, the phone trembling against his ear. "Who is this?" A low chuckle, familiar in a way that made his skin crawl. "Come now, you know exactly who this is. Though I suppose I should be flattered you're pretending otherwise. It means the secret still has power. That's impossible. You're dead?" The voice carried dark amusement. Yes, that was rather convenient, wasn't it? Amazing how eager people are to believe what they want to believe. Diego Armando Maradona, the fallen god, dying alone in his bed. Very poetic, very final. Roberto's apartment spun around him. This wasn't possible. He'd seen the funeral footage, read the medical reports, watched the world mourn. "This is sick. Whoever you are, this isn't funny. Look out your window, Roberto. The blue Fiat is back." With a dread that felt like drowning, Roberto moved to the window. The car sat in exactly the same spot as 3 days ago, but now he could see the driver clearly, a figure in sunglasses and a baseball cap, face turned upward toward his apartment. The stranger raised one hand in a small, mocking wave. 30 years, my friend. 30 years I've been waiting for you to find your courage, waiting for you to tell the truth about what really happened to Salvatore, about what I tried to do for him in that 73rd minute. Roberto's voice came out as a whisper. Maradona is dead. Diego Maradona is dead, yes. But I'm still here, still carrying the weight of what we witnessed, still remembering how you chose silence over justice when it mattered most. The room was spinning faster now. Roberto gripped the window frame, trying to process what he was hearing. The voice was identical. Every inflection, every pause, the particular way he pronounced certain vowels. Either someone had studied Maradona's speech patterns with obsessive precision, or— "You don't understand," Roberto managed. "They threatened my family. My daughter was 7 years old. They knew where she went to school, what time my wife walked to the market. I had no choice. Everyone has a choice, Roberto. I chose to try to help Salvatore during the match, even knowing it would expose me. You chose to take their money and disappear. And look where it got you. Look where it got him. Bagni died yesterday, alone in his apartment. You supposedly died in Buenos Aires. I'm the only one left, and they're hunting me down like an animal. Your courage got everyone killed." Silence stretched across the line, long enough that Roberto wondered if the connection had been lost. Then, quietly, "Salvatore didn't die of a heart attack, Roberto. He was murdered. Just like they tried to murder the real story of what happened in Mexico. Just like they've been systematically eliminating everyone who knew the truth." The phone slipped from Roberto's numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. Through the small speaker he could hear the voice continuing, but the words seemed to come from very far away. He stumbled to his kitchen table, staring at the VHS tape that had started this nightmare. When he finally picked up the phone again, the voice was saying, "Package Salvatore left for you contains more than just memories, my friend. It contains evidence that could finally expose what they did to him, what they did to all of us, but only if you're brave enough to collect it." "This isn't real," Roberto whispered. "You're dead. I need you to be dead. I understand. It was easier when you thought the secret died with us, wasn't it? When you could tell yourself that staying quiet was protecting people, instead of just protecting yourself." Roberto looked out the window again. The blue Fiat was gone, but somehow that felt more ominous than reassuring, like a chess piece being moved to a position he couldn't see. "If you're really alive," he said slowly, "if this isn't some elaborate psychological torture, then prove it. Tell me something only Diego would know. Something from that night in the hotel that never made it into any report." Another pause. "Then, you were wearing a blue shirt with a small stain on the collar, coffee, from breakfast. You kept touching it when you were nervous. And when they offered you the money, the first thing you said wasn't yes or no. You said, 'Will she be safe?'" The phone fell again, and this time Roberto didn't try to catch it. Roberto stared at the phone on the floor, its speaker crackling with static and the distant sound of breathing. His coffee-stained collar. That detail had haunted him for 30 years. Such a small thing, but it had made him feel exposed, vulnerable, like a child called before the principal. No one knew about that shirt except the 3 men in that hotel room. And now 2 of them were supposedly dead. He picked up the phone with shaking hands. The line was dead. Outside, Naples continued its ancient dance of chaos and beauty. Vendors calling out prices for vegetables, scooters weaving through narrow streets, children playing football against crumbling walls. Normal life, oblivious to the fact that his world had just shattered completely. Roberto's first instinct was to run, throw some clothes in a bag, catch the next train to anywhere, disappear into the anonymous sprawl of another city. He'd done it before, in smaller ways, leaving his coaching job with Napoli Youth Academy when questions started being asked about his past, moving from his family home when reporters began sniffing around old World Cup stories. But running required money, and someone had just demonstrated they could freeze his credit cards. Running required anonymity, and someone was watching his every move. Running required having somewhere safe to go, and if they'd killed Bagni in Florence, nowhere was safe. Instead, he found himself calling Gennaro's mother. "Signora Esposito? Roberto Vecchi. I'm sorry, but I won't be able to conduct training tomorrow. Family emergency." A pause. "Coach, is everything all right? You sound strange." Everyone could hear it now, the fear bleeding through his voice like ink through water. "Yes, fine. Just tell the boys to practice their passing drills. I'll be back soon." But even as he said it, Roberto wondered if he would ever see Campo Paradiso again, if he would ever shout encouragement from the sidelines while Gennaro bent shots into the top corner or watch little Marco finally master the step-over move that had been eluding him for months. The train ticket to Florence lay crumpled on his kitchen table. Bagni's envelope waited there like a trap, its contents unknown but certainly dangerous. Roberto smoothed out the ticket, studying the departure time. 6 hours from now. 6 hours to decide whether to walk into whatever web had been spun around him, or to spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "The package won't wait forever. Others are looking for it too. Others." The word sent ice through his veins. He wasn't the only one being manipulated here. Whatever game was being played, it had multiple participants, and Roberto was beginning to understand he might be the least dangerous person involved. He tried calling his sister Maria back, but her phone went straight to voicemail, Then he tried his daughter Lucia in Milan. Same result. The silence felt deliberate, orchestrated. How many people were being managed right now? How many conversations were being intercepted? How many movements tracked? Roberto walked to his closet and pulled out his old coaching jacket, the one from his brief stint with Napoli's youth academy, before his past had caught up with him there too. The fabric smelled like grass stains and adolescent dreams, like Saturday mornings when football still felt pure. He put it on like armor, knowing it was no protection at all. The VHS tape sat on his kitchen table, waiting. Roberto had avoided watching it for 3 days, terrified of what it might show him. But if he was walking into a trap anyway, if they already knew everything, then ignorance was just another form of cowardice. He slid the tape into his old player and pressed play. The footage was grainy, clearly shot from the stands with an amateur camera. It took him a moment to recognize the match: Italy versus Argentina World Cup 1986, Mexico City. The timestamp read 7:2:45, less than a minute until whatever happened in the 73rd minute that had supposedly made someone cry. Roberto watched himself on the sidelines, 24 years old, full of hope and terror in equal measure. Watched Bagni running toward a ball that seemed destined for his feet. Watched Maradona tracking back, his genius evident in every step. And then, at exactly 73:12, something happened that Roberto had never seen from this angle. Something that changed everything he thought he knew about that day. Maradona didn't hate Bagni. The footage showed the opposite, a moment of such pure compassion, such deliberate sacrifice, that Roberto understood why someone might cry watching it, why someone might spend 30 years carrying the weight of such beauty being corrupted by the men in expensive suits, why someone might fake their own death rather than let that truth die with them. The phone rang again. This time, Roberto answered without hesitation. "I watched it," he said. "Then you understand. It's time to finish what we started in Mexico City. It's time to tell the truth.